Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and welcome to this video about Python. Basically, what we're going to be doing here is just going over the basics of Python syntax. Again, over the videos, we'll learn more and more about Python, but the idea is to kind of get you used to programming and understanding how the Python environment works. So again, we're using a notebook. So this is what's referred to as a Jupyter notebook. Again, it offers this really nice way of writing Python code. Okay, but bottom line is let's start getting into it. And again, each of these Python files, like when you're using a notebook, instead of creating a .py file, you're creating these int.ipy, which means interactive Python notebook. Okay, so interactive Python notebook. Okay, and yeah, so let's do it. Now, a couple things to know. First off, we already learned that print is a way we can print text to the screen. But another good thing to know is how to write comments in Python, because you're going to want to oftentimes comment your code so that way you can go back and leave notes to yourself. So for example, I'm going to leave a comment here using the hash mark. I can write comments. These lines are ignored by the Python interpreter. Okay, so when it runs the code, it's just going to ignore that line. So for example, if I go then here, make another line and I print, this is all the output. Well, let's see what the output of the cell is. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the cell. And notice if I highlight the cell and I hit play, it's only going to run the cell. Okay, see, it didn't bother running the first cell again. Okay, now if I did want to run both cells again, I can go put my cursor back up here and it would run both cells. Okay, so for example, if I did hello world 2, see that the output didn't change yet. Okay, but again, if I just with a highlight here, the output will still not change because it didn't run this cell again. Then I can highlight this and then run that cell again, and now the output changes. Okay, just to kind of show you sort of like the nature of Notebook, how it's keeping track of the state for each cell or the information that the cell outputted until you run that cell again. Okay, it's really one of the most useful aspects of it. Because you could create a chart and then, from some code, and then you can then change some of the information and generate an updated chart. Okay, so here we go. Now let's talk about variables. So one of the things we want to do in Python is be able to create variables, being store data in a label. It's pretty simple how you do it. You just give a name. So we say, hey, this is my variable. This is my variable, a long name, but notice the way I spelt it. In general, the way you do variable naming in Python is through what's called, not camel case. Camel case is when you have the uppercase letter for each word. This is called snake case, which makes sense, right? Python is a snake. So we want to do snake case where you have the underscore separating each word. Okay, and then we just type in the equal sign. This is referred to as assigning a value. What you're doing is you're saying, hey, I have this box. The way I like to think about them is like empty boxes, and I want to put something in that empty box. Okay, and in that empty box, I'm going to put the number 2. Okay, so I want to put the number 2, and I want to see what's inside that box. So to see what's inside that box, I will print it. So I will say, hey, print, this is my variable. My variable. Okay, now notice that when I printed in the past, I put quotation marks. The reason is I was passing it a string. So a string is a type of data. So I'm saying, hey, this is some text that I want you to print. Now a variable, since I'm not saying print the text, this is my variable, I'm saying print the contents of this variable. You don't need quotation marks because the variable is the thing itself. You're saying, hey, here's the box, look inside of it, find what's inside and use that. So it's going to look inside that this is my variable box and find the number 2. So then when I run the cell, I should get an output of 2. And that's exactly what I get. And the cool thing is that variables can be reassigned. So if I want to change the value of that variable, I can just be like, this is my variable. And I am going to change it to 3. And then I will print it again. Print, this is my variable. Okay. And so now what's inside the box, I remove the 2 and put in the 3. That's what's inside the box now. So when I print that same box again, guess what? Oh, it's going to be, let's see what the output is, 3. Okay. So a variable is just a place to store literally anything. Okay, anything that is a piece of data in Python can be stored in a variable. So it's just a question of what do you want in it. I can store a string in a variable. So this is, we'll call this as my string equals hello. So I say, hey, I want this inside this box. You'll find this text. Okay, and then I want to print that string. Print my string. Okay, and now again, if I hit enter, it makes another line in the cell. If I hold shift enter, it actually runs the cell. Just so you're aware of like little shortcuts. Okay, and see, I get hello because that was what's inside that variable. Okay, so again, variables just equal whatever you've assigned to it. It's basically a label for you. Instead of me writing the thing, I can just always write the name of the box that I stored the thing in. Okay, cool. So that's variables. So again, for the most part, you have variables. And in variables, you can store strings, you can store numbers. Numbers generally come in two flavors. There's integers, which are whole numbers, and floats, which are numbers with decimals. Now, a cool thing about code is that code doesn't have to just be straightforward, do 1, do 2, do 3, do 4, do 5. Okay? You can start branching out. So I can say, hey, if, so let's create a number, let's say like if, we'll say my num equals 8. Okay? And then what we do is we say if, and then when you do an if statement, you put parentheses, and the parentheses you say what the question is. So like if what? Okay, so in here I'm going to say, hey, if my num, and then use two equal signs for equality. So one equal sign is assignment, I'm putting something in the box. Two equal sign, I'm asking the question, is this the same thing? Is the thing on the right the same as the thing on the left? So when I do two equal signs here, and I say, hey, is my num equal to 8? What I am saying is, oh, is my num equal to, is it the same thing as 8? I'm not saying it equals 8. I'm saying, are they numerically the same value? Now this introduces us to our first code block. Okay, so basically what happens in Python, certain expressions are going to require a block of code that belongs strictly to that thing. So this if statement needs a block of code that says, hey, if this if statement, if this thing is true, run this block of code. So the way Python handles code blocks, as far as knowing, hey, this code belongs to this if statement, is you, at the end of the if statement, and this goes for any time you need a block of code, you end that line with a colon. That's saying, okay, hey, here's my expression. And after this colon is the block of code that belongs to this expression. And that has to be separated by a single tab. So notice how it's tabbed, and it has to all line up. Anything that's perfectly lined up under that if statement, one tab over, belongs to that if statement. So now I can say, hey, print, yes, it is equal. Okay. And then if I want to go back to my main line of code, I just go back to that main indentation. So indentation's a very big thing in Python. I can't stress that enough. It's a very, very big deal. Now, the cool thing about the if is that if I want to express what happens if it's not true, I can write, I could do one of two things. I could do an elif, which means else if. So in this case, what I can do is I can check for another thing. So I can say, hey, well, if my num is not 8, what if my num is 7? Okay, and then I can make a code block for that. And I say print, yes, it is 7. And that code will only run if that block is evaluated to be true, if the first one's evaluated to be false, because it would only evaluate this if this is false. And then we have else. And if all else fails, then we can write an else block, put the colon, designated a block, tab, and I can say print didn't match any of the numbers. Okay, so now let's run that block and see it says, yes, it is equal, because right now my num does equal 8. Okay, so it's only going to run the code block that belongs to that expression, and it doesn't even bother to evaluate the other two. Okay, now let's see what happens if I make it the number 7. Okay, and we run that code block again. Yes, it is 7. Okay, so that works. Now let's see what happens if we make it the 6 and we run it. Okay, it didn't match any of the numbers. So you see, like, that allows us to kind of create variability in the code. Okay, where we can check, hey, is this something? And again, this could be anything. It could be like greater than 8. So I could be like, hey, I'm checking whether the number is greater than 8, whether it's less than 8, whether it's greater than or equal than 8, less than or equal than 8. Okay, or if is it not equal to 8. These are all things that I can check for, I can ask about. And you can even do more complex expressions, which we'll get into in the future videos. But just want to kind of introduce you to the basic syntax. So again, the main thing here is how do you assign variables? So again, it's just the name of the variable, then you assign it a value. Okay, and then using if statements, where basically if statements create a block. Blocks are always designated by putting a colon at the end of that expression with an indented code block that designates sort of, hey, this belongs to that expression underneath it. So this indented code block here belongs to this if statement. In the same way, this indented code block here belongs to this else if statement. Okay, with that, we'll wrap this video up and we'll do more in the next one.